Hello everyone and welcome back to Carved in Stone. Today we have a very important task. We need some cows. I said this last time, but cows are ridiculously important in Pictland. They're like the most valuable livestock you could possibly have. You could say that we invested in the stock market, the livestock market. Oh no. We know the Picts valued cattle because when we find animal bones at Pictish sites, most of them are usually cattle bones, as in like 2/3 of the animal bones are cattle bones. It's not a slim margin or anything. The vast majority of bones, animal bones at a site are cattle bones. But we also know that the Picts valued cattle because they carved cattle into their stones. Just look at these little guys. Aren't they great? I'm realizing that between this and the rock art video I did on ArchaeoSMP and this adorable hedgehog I posted on Blue Sky that I'm really just a sucker for archaeological animal art, but I don't feel like that's a problem. These are the Burghead bulls. So, back in the 19th century, construction around the harbour at Burghead discovered about 30 of these dudes, but sadly only 6 of them survive today. But also look at how similar these bull carvings are. Sure, they're all from the same site, so it could be that the same stone carver made all of the bulls, but there are different types of Pictish art, as you're hopefully starting to see, and different types of Pictish art have different standards, different rules that they follow. These bulls are classic examples of Pictish animal symbols. Pictish animal symbols are two-dimensional representations of an animal with a standard shape across pretty much all of their carvings, and they have these characteristic swirls at the joints, like the shoulder or the hip. When we're talking about Pictish cattle symbols or Pictish bull symbols, they also have this very similar stance where you can see each of their legs. First the left foreleg, then the right back leg, and then the left, and all of the cattle are facing to the right. But there are also subtle differences between them. Some bulls have their tails up as if they're swatting away flies, while others have them just hanging down behind them. Some of the bulls have their head lowered to be almost charging at something, and others have their heads a little bit more raised, as if they're just vibing in a meadow. So while these symbols are very similar, they're also very different. But they're also all clearly cattle, and these ones are clearly all bulls. So we Picts have cattle, and cattle are valuable in Pictland, but you're probably wondering why. What do we get from cattle? And the answer is quite a lot. The first one is probably pretty obvious. It's food. There's so much food that you get from a cow. Milk, cheese, cream, especially the kind that you can dollop over raspberries in summer. But we also use cattle for beef once their milk is slowed, or we'll eat veal because you don't really need a whole lot of bulls in your herd. That's just going to cause a lot of problems. Cattle bones also make for an excellent super stew, and you can kind of get some kind of gluey substance from them depending on Look, I'm the mayor of this town. I am not a specialist in a craft, but I do know that some tradesfolk can get quite a lot out of cattle bones. Now, you may be sitting there wondering, ArchaeoPlays, you said that the Picts had dairy. Do we have like Pictish cheese or Pictish butter? Unfortunately, no, we don't have any of those, but we can still tell that the Picts ate a lot of dairy because we can look at the age of the cattle bones that we find in Pictish sites. So basically what we're looking at when we look at cattle bones is the age at which the animal died. When we find lots of bones from young animals and we find bones from adults that were 3 years old or older when they died, that tells us that the animals were used for dairying, because the primary age for dairy cattle starts around 12 to 18 months, and then their milk will taper off anywhere between 3 and 5 years, more or less. If you've got a good milk cow, you're not going to use them for meat until they're no longer giving you milk. So that means that when we look at these bones and we don't find any bones that are in that prime milking category of ages, generally speaking, that means that the people who owned those cattle were using them for dairy. In terms of the younger cattle, when we find bones that are young calves, for example, people who keep dairying cattle generally have a lot more calves that they need to do something with. You don't get milk without calves, but you also generally don't need that many new calves per year. So you have to do something with them, and certainly in the past, a lot of people would kill extra calves and eat them. That's where veal comes from. But on top of that, we have stories of people milking cattle from Pictland's neighbours. Adhavnan, who was the abbot of the monastery on Iona from 679 to 704 CE, wrote a whole book, or a hagiography, which is a book about a specific person, and in this case about St. Columba, who founded that monastery on Iona in 563 CE. In his book, Adhavnan talks about St. Columba driving out a demon that was lurking in a milk pail. Columba then scolds the young man who brought the milk to be blessed, saying, "Rise up, Columban, for thou hast acted negligently in thy work today, inasmuch as thou didst not banish the demon that lurked in the bottom of the empty vessel by forming on it the sign of the cross of our Lord before the milk was poured into it. And now, as thou seest, being unable to bear the power of that sign, he has quickly fled in terror, troubling the whole vessel in every corner, and spilled the milk." Columba is basically saying, dude, make sure to banish the demons before you milk the cow, because if you do it after, the demon's going to spill all your milk. Bottom line, the Picts milked their cows and almost certainly turned that milk into any dairy product that they could. We'll often mix cattle fat with sheep fat to make tallow, which we can then use to make candles, which are really handy when you live in a turf house that doesn't have any windows. And then, of course, cattle hides turn into leather, and calf hides can be turned into parchment or even vellum, depending on the age and quality of the animal. But also, cattle aren't just good for food or leather or candles. We put a lot of our cattle to work here in Pictland. Only nobles are allowed horses, and even though I am the de facto head person of this village, I am not important enough to ride a horse, okay? So the rest of us tend to travel with an ox or two. It might limit where we can go because oxen are big and they can be a bit stubborn, but they certainly help us carry things from place to place. Personally, I don't know about you, but if I'm going farther than the nearest village, I'd much rather have an ox pull my cart than have to pull it myself. Also, if you've got a small child traveling with you, they can ride on the ox without either of them getting hurt, so it saves your arms a bit from carrying a small child long distances. And our farmers down there certainly wouldn't be able to plough their fields without oxen. Imagine trying to plough a field yourself. Sure, it's doable, but why would you when you can use an ox? It's right there. Oxen aren't a specific breed of cattle. They're just cattle that are over 4 years old and who have been trained to work. Or really, they're considered fully trained at 4, so you might purchase an ox that's only 3 years old so that you can spend the next year training them, for example. But probably the most important and sacred use for cattle is in warding our buildings. So, you know how I said that the first thing to do when you move into a new place is to build a hearth? That's still true, but there's one other really important thing to do if no one's lived in the building for a while, and that is to clear out the old bone wards. Bone wards are something that we do when we leave a building, okay? So if one of our villagers were to move out of their house, we would put bone wards around the building. We can use cattle bones, we can use other animals, but cattle bones tend to work really well. Bone wards protect the building from spirits or demons that want to cause trouble or take up residence in the meantime before somebody else moves into the building. Bone wards keep the building safe, and they release any of your own spirit or your own energy from the house so that you don't have anything anchoring you here on your way elsewhere. It would be a really bad idea to leave, a portion of your soul, really, in the building behind because you forgot to put a bone ward. Okay, so this is getting into a lot more speculation than the rest of this cattle information, because we're getting into what people believed and how they practiced those beliefs. Now, throughout this series, I'm going to be talking both as my archaeological self in these kind of outboxes, I'm going to be talking as a Minecraft player, and I'm going to be talking as a Pictish person. The things that I say in terms of what I believe as a Pictish person is, to the best of our knowledge, what we think the Picts may have believed. It is not necessarily what I as ArchaeoPlays believe. It is also not necessarily what the Picts actually believed. It's just our best guess from what evidence remains and what we've been able to uncover. We do have bone wards in Pictish buildings. At Scalloway in Shetland, 2 articulated cattle legs were placed in the doorway of the building before people left. And at Rhynie, which was a major site, roughly a century or so before the period that Carved in Stone is set in, when people left Rhynie, a lot of the post holes around the site were filled in with animal bones after the posts were taken out. So we need cattle, because what self-respecting village, and we might even be considered a town at this point, what self-respecting town doesn't have cattle? And as the now de facto mayor of this town, even though technically I didn't actually need to become mayor. I found out that that hay bales, I didn't realize this, hay bales don't get, they won't burn with lava. Like, lava's not going to catch them on fire. So it's actually fine. It's perfectly fine for the hay bales to have been sitting next to the lava. That's why they didn't catch for so long. They're never gonna. So technically I didn't need to take over the food supply, but I have now. And now that I've got a taste for power, I'm not gonna give it up. So, so we need cattle. It's my job as de facto mayor. You know, you can't have power without responsibilities. So we need to make an enclosure. Well, we need to get cattle. I could just put them in here. Like, I could just, here, you know what? Like, for right now, because we've got cattle. Hold on. Here, let's get some wheat. Come here, because you're all right here. I may as well collect yous. But what did Pictish cattle really look like? I mean, for starters, they look a lot like these carvings. The Picts were very skilled at carving things into stone, and across their symbols and their other stone art, they are incredibly accurate when it comes to the natural world. Basically, when the Picts wanted to be accurate, they were. So their fish aren't just easily identifiable as fish, they're pretty easily identifiable as salmon specifically. Their boars are clearly boars, their deer are clearly deer, the wolves, the horses, the cattle, they can carve really recognizable animals if they really want to. But we also do know a bit about European cattle breeds for this period. Well, sort of. Honestly, it's a bit more pieced together from the closest periods to the Picts that I could get. The thing about ancient animal breeds is that they generally don't exist today, or certainly not in the same way that they did in ancient times. It's also not usually possible to identify specific cattle breeds from their remains, but we do have records of very old cattle breeds. Shetland cattle here in Scotland are one of those ancient breeds. It's probably impossible to know exactly how old they are, but they were probably domesticated from wild aurochs starting about 5,000 years ago. By the Iron Age, so about 800 BCE-ish for Scotland, we only find smaller cattle breeds in Orkney and Shetland, breeds that are similar in size to modern Shetland cattle. But between the Picts and us, there's a whole lot of history, including all the Viking stuff and trade with the Norse. Basically, modern Shetland cattle are probably quite a bit different to Pictish cattle, but they're the closest that we can get at the moment. So Shetland cattle are these lovely little cattle. They've got predominantly black hair with patches of white in, well, not all of them have patches of white, but a number of them have patches of white across them. And they've got horns that kind of point to the side a bit before they start to point upwards and forwards. We also have Galloway cattle. Galloway cattle are known from as far back as the 1500s, which may seem a lot younger than Shetland cattle, but trust me, Galloways are one of the oldest breeds in Europe that we know of. Also, once you get earlier than the 1500s, unless you're looking at a society that kept meticulous records of their cattle breeds, it's gonna be a struggle to find any reference to specific breeds of cattle. Galloway cattle originated in Galloway, Scotland, as far as we're aware. They're a similar size to Shetland cattle, so a little bit on the smaller side to what you might think of for modern cattle breeds. And they tend to be they have darker, fluffier hair that tends to be kind of like a deep brown or almost like a deep reddish brown colour. Galloway cattle also don't have horns, even the bulls. Galloway cattle and Shetland cattle, as I just said, are both similar heights, so they're roughly 120 to 135 centimeters tall, which is about 47 to 53 inches, which is actually on the shorter side as far as cattle go. Standard cattle sizes are more like 157 centimeters or 62 inches tall, so they can be a good 30 centimeters shorter than the average cattle size. But, fun fact for you, Shetland cattle are considered small cattle, while Galloway cattle are considered medium, even though they're the same height. Why? Because Galloways have heavier bones. Shetland cattle have evolved to the harsh climate of Shetland. There isn't huge amounts of vegetation or good grazing land in Shetland, so the lighter frames of Shetland cattle reduces poaching on grazing land. poaching, when we're talking about grazing, is the damage that heavy livestock cause to the land as they walk. So basically all of that dirt and such that they churn up with their hooves when they walk somewhere. So because Shetland cattle are lighter, they don't churn up as much dirt, which also means they don't uproot as many plants as they walk, which leaves more plants for them to eat. It's a great evolutionary trait for areas of Scotland where grazing land is fragile or scarce, and believe it or not, there are a lot of those. Now what I've done, I made the cows look like Pictish cows. Okay, now granted, like regular cows, something's happened with the eye. I think they've got like some bit of fur over their eye, or maybe I just was silly and accidentally painted over it. Don't worry too much about it. This is a Shetland cow. Look how cute they are! Honestly, this is just like a redone texture of the regular Minecraft cattle within the models that are already created, because I only have so much time to add adjustments and I'm not very good at creating entity models. So we have a Shetland cattle, and then we also have Galloway cattle, which I don't think I will see any of them here because of the settings. I've backported, well, I've used a backport for the mob variants, but then I've changed the textures of those variants to be Pictish cattle. The Galloway cattle spawn in cold biomes, so we'll definitely see them, just not in our plains biome. Here's some of the Galloway cattle in a creative world, because I can't show you in survival yet. But aren't they great? Actually, hold on, wait a minute. Here's both together. They're adorable! Okay, right, so first thing we need to do is build a byre, because we need somewhere for these cows to be. And the reason we need a byre instead of just a pen in the middle of, well, at the edge of town, is because cows are incredibly valuable. And somebody, like random teenagers from the next village over, they could just come in and steal our cows. And that would be a travesty. So we need to make sure that our cows are kept safe. And leaving them just in a fenced-off paddock isn't gonna do a whole heck of a lot. So we need to build a byre. So a byre is basically a barn. That's just what it means. It's a place to keep your animals. In Pictland, our byres are often connected to our houses. So instead of a house, we'll have a byre house. We're probably not going to make a byre house today though, not because I don't want to, but because I don't have a lot of the materials for the house part yet. Now for your byre floor, what you want to do is pave it with stone. At least most of the time, that's what we do, because it is significantly easier to clean most of the time. I don't know about you, but I would rather not muck out a building with a dirt floor. And we need grass, because that's going to be the thatch for our roof. Technically, some folk use straw from like wheat crops, but that's super wealthy folk rather than like us regular folks, okay? We're not super wealthy. I know we've got 4 cows here, and I said cows are valuable. They are valuable. 4 cows is not that valuable. So yeah, most folk actually use heather, but I haven't added heather to the mod pack yet, so we're using grass for now. And this is literally just like a recolored version of the hay block. It's a little bit, I might change the color. It's a little too green, maybe. But mostly I just wanted it to be like relatively freshly harvested grass, you know? Because that's what it is. We're going to collect the grass, and then we're going to collect a lot of the turf here. And the reason that that's important, Pictish houses are predominantly made of turf. And what that means is that the landscape around the village is going to change a bit because we're using the dirt to build the houses. So this landscape that we started with, it's going to change. And it's probably going to change pretty significantly because all of these houses are going to be made out of turf, and all of that turf is going to come from here. It's not going to come from, you know, across the ocean. Why would we bring a bunch of turf across the ocean? We're going to use it from here. Here's the thing to keep in mind when you're building a house in Pictland. As we harvest this turf, as we dig it up for our byre, we want to keep things fairly level, fairly smooth, fairly natural looking. You don't want to go and dig up a big massive hole in your front garden. That's just not, you're just going to end up with a hole in your garden. You really don't want to do that. So yes, we do need a lot of turf for our buildings, but the last thing you want to do is just dig a massive pit in the ground. In part because you need turf with the root systems and not just dirt, but also because you don't want to turn the entire village into a tripping hazard. So if the entrance is going to be here-ish, that means that we need this to be level ground. So that we're building a byre on level ground, or at least more or less on level ground. Because if you're going to put cattle on it, you better hope that ground is stable and not about to collapse. So my general shape for a byre or a byre house, easy default design is to do like 3 and then 1 and then you've got a rounded edge. Oh, I can't stand on leaves, I forgot. You've got a rounded edge, but it's basically like 3 wide on the side, and then with 1 curving towards the longer edges, basically. So I'm just going to mark that out here. Now, granted, byre houses are somewhere in the range, they're generally about 20 meters long. So basically from here, it would actually overhang this hill, right? They're long buildings. And the reason for that is because most of the building, well, half of the building, roughly, is for people, and the other half is for animals. But we're not building a people house. We're not building a byre house. We're just building a byre. So we just need a space for the animals. Now, in order for the animals to get in, we're going to have a double door instead of a single door because it's just going to be easier. And we're going to terraform some of this hill because we need to in order for this to work. I don't even know how many I've gone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Sure, let's do it a weird number. 11. Oops. I have identified a problem. So byres, when you build a byre, you want it to be sloped towards one corner of the building. And that way, with your cobblestone floor, when the animals make a mess or when you're cleaning it out, you can just chuck water onto the floor and it'll all flow downhill to your drain and outside. The problem is, with this byre, that downhill this way is A, our farms, and B, the rest of the village. So we're not going to want it to flow downhill that way. It could flow downhill this way, but then we might want to put, yeah, I think we might do that and then make it like a bit blocked off from the path. Because you don't want all of that just flowing onto the walking path. Not that this path goes anywhere, actually. It just goes like this way. There's nothing actually here. Aside from a cat, apparently. A cat and a frog. So it's okay if we just don't worry too much about the path. Yeah, I think that's what we're gonna do. I think we'll have it flow into that corner and then just like maybe plant a tree or something so that it's not like flowing downhill right into the walking path. Okay, the other thing we want from a byre is a sloped, like the floor tends to be lower than the door. I'm gonna take this out and use cobblestone in the same way that we've got cobblestone on the bottom over there. I'm gonna put cobblestone on the bottom here. We're losing all, you know, it's just an opportunity for me to come back through at some point and terraform. You know, it's just, think of all this disappearing grass as opportunities for later decorating and terraforming. That's what I'm telling myself. Well, it's gonna look worse before it looks better. Trust the process, it's gonna be fine. But again, part of the whole point of doing this and showing you like how much we're taking out of this landscape in order to put into this building is to show you how much the landscape changes when you build a turf house. Like it's not irretrievable or anything, it's not irreversible necessarily, but we are doing a lot to this landscape and it's changing in various ways. And we're not going to exactly remember how it was before necessarily. So even if we try to restore it, it's not necessarily going to be the exact same as it was. And that's okay. Part of the point of this is showing the change. as you've probably noticed, there isn't a whole lot of like gradient happening with this. I'm not worrying about it at the moment, but there will be like actual Minecraft builder gradienting happening, or like coloration, shading basically happening. It's gonna happen. It just hasn't yet. So don't worry too much about it. Wait, what? Oh no! Wait! By mob? How? Was the... But mobs don't spawn. Did they fall into a dungeon or something? Where is this? Hold on. 5141 and 3010. This is not a dungeon. Is this it? What would attack them here? Right, editing Archeo here. I went back through the footage, the replay mod footage, and found what I'd done wrong. I forgot about sieges. In hard mode in Minecraft, zombie sieges have a chance to spawn if a player is awake in a village after midnight. They're like gremlins, but worse. During a siege, up to 20 zombies spawn in a village, and as you can guess, they attack the villagers. So Kined was defending the village from a siege, and a zombie killed him, and because it's hard mode, he then turned into a zombie villager, and then one of the other hunters killed the zombie villager. I disabled natural spawns for hostile mobs. I forgot to disable sieges. I've resolved it now. And honestly, okay, right, there's a part of me that is very sad that Kined died. There is also a part of me that is conscious that because mobs don't spawn in the overworld, sieges would be the only way that villagers could potentially die, aside from villager nonsense. So part of me, I've disabled sieges for now, but part of me is wondering if I should leave them on as a possible danger, or I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And I guess, you know, I wasn't planning on doing this next episode, but I guess we're gonna scout out a burial ground to put Kined to rest, which is really sad. I'm more sad than if a villager had just died. I feel like because he had a name and I got a notification, I feel so much worse. Goodness, that's so sad. Oh man, I'm gutted. I suppose it's a bit bittersweet with Kined. The byre is done, at least the outside. Hold on, here, let's do an inside. It's not terribly difficult. We're gonna do 2 there, and then we're gonna put these gates, and then they open. And isn't this great? Okay, we've got an interior. Excellent. I'm so happy. I think the drainage works. I mean, you would want it to be draining into dirt, honestly. So actually, I should probably even just take these out and put them back to dirt because you don't want it draining into rocks per se. And we've got some extra torches, so we'll put a torch here and we'll put one here maybe. And then it's, you know, it's not so dark in here. We've got a nice little byre, and we now have cows. We don't have terribly many. We have 6 cows, but we're gonna have more. 6 is more than 4. We only started the episode with 4, so actually, technically, we started the episode with 0. So 0 to 6 is a pretty good. That's a pretty good increase in profits. Anyway, we have cows. If you're curious about more Scottish history surrounding cows, head on over to my Sheelings video, or if you happen to miss the first episode in this series, here's a link to that as well. That's all from me for today, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.